The chilly October morning of 2016 began with an unusual disturbance on Brinsworth Lane in Rotherham. 4 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a modest terraced house in the middle of a quiet residential area. Neighbors peered through their curtains as officers in bulletproof vests and carrying sealed document envelopes took up positions. Inside, 45-year-old Darren Cole was brewing his morning tea, a habit he had maintained since leaving his job as a security guard at the University of Sheffield more than a decade earlier. A rapid knock sounded at 6:47 a.m. Darren Cole, South Yorkshire Police. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of Ellie Hart in 2002. The officers later described how his hand trembled slightly as he set down the teapot, but his face remained strangely calm, as if he had known this moment was coming. He just didn't know which morning it would arrive on. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Sheffield in 2002 still bore the look of an industrial city that had just emerged from the decline of the steel industry. Old brick buildings mixed with new constructions, dampness from intermittent rain seeping onto the streets, and the characteristic yellow sodium streetlights casting a hazy glow over the wet asphalt, turning West Street and Division Street into long streaks of dim light in the late autumn night. Students from the University of Sheffield and Sheffield Hallam poured onto the streets after classes, pubs stayed open late, indie music mixed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hurried footsteps of people in the chilly air. City police were accustomed to drunkenness, arguments, and occasional light scuffles in crowded corners, but long-term missing persons cases were so rare they mostly existed only in old newspapers. In that atmosphere, 23-year-old Ellie Hart left a friend's birthday party with her close group of friends. The cold wind blowing along the row of buildings near West Street made her pull her light-colored coat tighter, her face still flushed from beer and lingering laughter. When her boyfriend Tom Wilkes pulled up to wait in Rockingham Street, an argument flared up quickly like a small crack in the night. Fragmented words, Tom's voice tinged with irritation, Ellie turning away to avoid his gaze. The air in the car grew thick, then Ellie suddenly opened the door and stepped out without another word, just gripping her bag strap tightly and turning her back on the glowing interior light. She walked alone toward Brook Hill Roundabout, where the road leading to the Arts Tower was interrupted by stretches of darkness between widely spaced streetlights. A CCTV camera along Western Bank captured a blurry image, the figure of a young woman in a light-colored coat, walking quickly down the slope before gradually disappearing into a section obscured by tree shadows. Just minutes later, that figure vanished completely from the camera's view. Tom waited in the car, calling repeatedly, but getting no answer. He drove around Rockingham Street, then returned to West Street, asking a few friends in the group if Ellie had come back to the pub, but everyone shook their heads. No one had seen her after she left the bar. With each passing minute, Tom's restlessness swelled into an unnamed fear. The night wind whistled against the damp windows, the streets were still busy, but Ellie seemed to have melted away from all familiar paths. When he realized the phone's silence was no longer just sulking, Tom dialed the police in a state of utter panic, his hands shaking. And just minutes after that call, South Yorkshire Police received the missing person report for Ellie Hart, while the city was still half asleep. A thin layer of mist covering the old brick rows of houses and blurring the streetlights into characteristic orange halo. When a patrol car stopped on Rockingham Street, 2 officers stepped out and quickly sensed the tension enveloping Tom Wilkes, who still wore the dazed expression from an argument that hadn't yet cooled before his girlfriend vanished without explanation. The first thing they did was move Tom away from the sparse traffic, still moving on the downtown slope, and ask him to recount the entire incident from the moment he arrived to pick up Ellie. Tom tried to stay calm, but his voice broke as he described how Ellie had left her friend's birthday party in a not bad but vulnerable mood after a long evening. On the way home, an argument broke out between them, Then Ellie opened the car door and walked away without looking back or answering any calls. The night shift officers recorded his full statement in the initial report, noting key timelines such as when Ellie left the pub, when she left Tom's car, and the direction she headed toward Brook Hill roundabout. But at this stage, police were only gathering information, not yet drawing conclusions. When Ellie's friends were called back to West Street to provide additional statements, they confirmed that Ellie had been completely normal that evening. She wasn't drunk enough to lose control, hadn't left the group alone, and showed no signs of wanting to avoid anyone or meet someone privately. The officers noted every small detail, including that Ellie was wearing a light-colored coat, carrying a small canvas bag, and wearing trainers instead of heels, details often used later to identify her in footage. From these statements, police began reconstructing the night's timeline, focusing on the moments Ellie was still with the group and the last time Tom saw her in the glow of his parked car's interior light near Rockingham Street. Collecting CCTV footage was the next step. Although Sheffield's 2002 system was sparse, police still requested technical units to contact shops, pubs, and traffic cameras along West Street, Division Street, and Brook Hill roundabout for recordings from the past few hours. A technician recalled that cameras from that era were often noisy, low resolution, and retained data for only a limited time, but any image showing Ellie was considered extremely important. The retrieved recordings were sealed and sent to the image review room, where a team of officers would scan every frame to confirm where Ellie last appeared on the busy streets and where she vanished from view. While the footage was being gathered, a formal risk assessment was conducted. Ellie was a young woman with no history of long voluntary absences, no dangerous chronic illnesses, and no prior threats. Though she had been drinking, she wasn't out of control. The time without contact wasn't long, but was unusual enough to raise concern, especially since she left her boyfriend after an argument and walked alone through areas with many dark spots. Combining these factors, police classified Ellie as a medium-risk missing person, a category requiring rapid response and data collection that night before traces were erased by time or morning activity. With this classification, officers were directed to map the probable areas Ellie might have gone. Based on the last camera sighting, police sketched 3 likely routes she might have instinctively taken: the direct path to the Arts Tower, easy to identify, but with many tree-obscured sections; the detour down to Weston Park with numerous small shortcuts students often used; and the route toward Crooks Valley, quieter but poorly lit. These 3 routes were prioritized in the initial report, becoming the first framework for determining where to recheck cameras, interview witnesses in the morning, and identify areas Ellie likely passed through. When the initial report was complete, the shift officers signed it and added it to the case file, officially moving Ellie Hart's disappearance from an emergency night response to an organized investigation. And then, while Sheffield was still not fully light, and the early morning chill lingered under the rows of trees, the CSI team was dispatched to Western Bank, the last place Ellie was captured on camera, and began walking in lines across the damp pavement, reflecting sodium lights, splitting up to search every square meter from the university campus entrance to the trail leading down to Weston Park, one of the possible turns Ellie might have taken. They turned on high-powered flashlights, sweeping beams into the tree lines along the sidewalk, where the old elm canopies created thick dark patches like heavy paint, making observation difficult even as dawn approached. Police used stakes to mark boundaries on both sides of the road, then surveyed the surface roadside ditches, patchy grass strips, and the side paths students often used to cut through campus at night. One officer pointed to the camera mounted on the corner of the old stone building near Western Bank, noting it was the one that captured Ellie's final frame. The technical team reconstructed the camera's position and field of view by measuring angles, detection range, and aligning timestamps, ensuring the figure in the video was Ellie based on posture, shoulder tilt, and stride length matching her description. But just beyond the small curve leading to the road between the Arts Tower and the library, the next camera that should have caught Ellie showed nothing but white noise. When zoomed in, Only a blotchy dark area appeared, where light was insufficient to clearly record a person. From this point, the CSI team began marking numerous blind spots, areas completely uncovered by 2002 cameras. They noted each on the map: sections blocked by trees, road stretches shaded by buildings, the area around the small garden behind the Arts Tower, with limited camera angles, and the edge of Weston Park with only one dim functioning streetlight at night. Each blind spot was numbered, circled in red, and rated for risk based on the likelihood Ellie passed through without being recorded. Deeper into Weston Park, the CSI team realized the area had a web of intersecting small paths, most outside any camera's view. These paths led to sunken lawns, a few ancient stone pillars, and wooden benches under large trees, all submerged in light-starved darkness at night. One officer pointed out that if Ellie changed direction at any point in the park, tracing her in video would be nearly impossible. The investigation team documented the terrain with photos, measured distances from the main road to each branch path, and marked spots where someone could slip, fall, or be hidden. They also checked the small parking lot behind the library, where a few old cars had been parked that night, but were out of camera range due to low angles. The entire area was searched with LED flashlights and scopes for dark corners, but no trace of Ellie was found. No dropped bag, no fabric scrap, no scuff marks on the ground, not even clear shoe prints. Every stone and tree root was examined, but there were no signs of unusual disturbance. Moving around to the back of the Arts Tower, the CSI team encountered a narrow alley between two buildings. A true blind spot, as the camera at the far end only operated during the day and was useless at night. The high, damp walls and narrow passage barely allowed two people to pass side by side. No 2002 camera could have captured an image if Ellie walked through here. One officer used a light meter to confirm that illumination in the alley was nearly 80% below what old camera sensors could detect. This made it a dangerous blind spot, possibly where Ellie passed unnoticed. After sweeping the entire roadside, park, and trails, the CSI team regrouped at the spot where the camera last recorded Ellie. They used red string to outline a blind triangle, an area within a 200-meter radius that no camera could cover. The triangle encompassed the edge of Weston Park, half the alley behind the Arts Tower, and a side road next to the library, 3 points connected by suspicious shadowed corners, untouched by streetlights. When the preliminary report was compiled, the CSI team reached an initial conclusion: Ellie Hart disappeared in a narrow but complex and hard-to-access camera black zone, where every possible movement could not be recorded or traced. There was no physical evidence left behind, no signs of struggle, no obvious anomalies on the ground. Only one thing was certain: Ellie had walked into that darkness, and from then on, no camera or witness ever saw her again. While the CSI team continued reconstructing the areas Ellie might have passed through, another police unit was assigned the task of collecting witness statements, an equally important part of the investigation, as it allowed them to fill in the gaps that cameras could not cover. The officers in charge returned to West Street, where the birthday party had taken place, to meet with Ellie's group of friends. They sat in a quieter corner of the pub, which had just reopened for the morning shift, with the lingering smell of alcohol from the night before still in the air. But each person tried their best to recall exactly what had happened. One female friend said that Ellie was completely sober, a bit tired from the long evening, but not drunk to the point of impaired judgment. She was still chatting, laughing, and did not leave the group alone. Another remembered Ellie complaining about pressure at school, but she made no mention of wanting to leave the party early or avoiding anyone. Everyone confirmed that Ellie left the pub walking normally, not staggering, not followed by anyone, and with no unusual interactions with strangers. Several pub staff members confirmed the same. Ellie left with her group of friends, did not draw attention, and there were no fights or any arguments inside the pub. One staff member remembered her wearing a light-colored jacket, hair tied low, and stepping outside with two friends before Tom arrived to pick her up. From this description, police noted the identifying features to cross-check with the images captured on camera. When the group of friends was allowed to leave, police shifted focus to the Brook Hill roundabout and the slope leading up to the Arts Tower, the area where Ellie was last seen walking into the darkness. They went door to door in homes near the route Ellie might have taken, knocking and asking if anyone was still awake at that time or had heard anything unusual. Some residents, mostly students or night shift workers, said they had not seen any girl matching the police description, but 2 people said they heard a woman's voice echoing from a distance, a voice that seemed to be arguing or raising its tone with someone, though they could not pinpoint the direction of the sound. Both insisted they saw no figures, only heard the sound for a few seconds before it went silent. Police noted this detail in the report, but remained cautious, as Brook Hill is an area near major roads, where traffic noise and pedestrian sounds mix in the night, making it hard to identify the source. However, this was the first indirect information suggesting Ellie might have had contact with someone after leaving Tom. As they continued along the route leading to the Arts Tower, the officers encountered another witness, a University of Sheffield security guard, who was changing shifts when approached by police. He did not recall seeing anyone matching Ellie's description pass through the main gate, but confirmed hearing from night shift colleagues that the area near the Arts Tower often had students passing late, though no one lingered long due to dim lighting and low foot traffic. This statement provided no specific details, but it helped police confirm that Ellie walking into this area was not unusual. Students often used this route to return to dorms on weekends. Meanwhile, the final officer interviewing from the witness list was someone noted from the start, Darren Cole, the campus security officer on night duty when Ellie disappeared. He was summoned to the duty room to provide information. Darren said he was patrolling the Arts Tower area and the paths around the library late at night. When asked if he saw anyone matching Ellie's description, light-colored jacket, fast pace, walking alone, Darren replied that he did not recall encountering anyone like that. When pressed about the time he passed through Weston Park, Darren said he only went through that area early in his shift and did not return after midnight because the campus was quite quiet by then. This statement was fully recorded, but Darren's calm voice and somewhat cautious demeanor led one officer to add a few observational notes. He answered procedurally but avoided providing detailed descriptions of what he saw in the area beyond the arts building. However, nothing was unusual enough to warrant special notation. When witness collection concluded, police had a fragmented chain of testimonies, each contributing a small piece. Ellie left the pub calm, with no one following. She walked into a low-traffic area, and someone heard a woman's arguing voice from afar at a time coinciding with her disappearance. Though all were important data points, they still could not form a clear picture of what happened after the moment Ellie stepped into the dark patch beyond the trees on Western Bank, where the last camera stopped and left an unanswered question. As the teams handling scene surveys and witness statements completed their work, the investigation unit responsible for analyzing Ellie Hart's communications began examining her phone, a basic Nokia model that Tom had handed over to police on the night he reported her missing. Since the device was powered off when checked, police could only extract the data stored in memory, including messages, call history and contacts, elements that might reveal if Ellie had contacted anyone else after leaving Tom. Opening the messages, they found a chain of exchanges between Ellie and Tom before the argument, short texts, not angry or desperate, just a few sensitive back and forths influenced by Ellie's drinking. The last message sent by Ellie contained no sign she wanted to leave, avoid someone or run away. It was brief, a bit clumsy, but without unusual tone. This was the first notable point, because in many cases of adults voluntarily leaving, the final messages often show intent to cut contact or end conversation. Here everything stopped too abruptly, with no signs of preparation or planning. The call log was checked next. The history showed Ellie making or receiving calls from Tom and a few friends that evening, but no unknown numbers appeared close to the time of her disappearance. One officer noted that Ellie's communication pattern was completely normal, consistent with a night out with friends. No missed calls from strangers, no urgent calls or unsaved numbers. This temporarily ruled out the possibility of Ellie meeting an unexpected appointment or being called to another location. Examining the details of the last sent message, police noted the timestamp was not long before Ellie left Tom's car. That meant her phone was still active when she entered the dark stretch toward the Arts Tower. Yet only a short time later, the phone was completely shut off. This was the clearest anomaly, as those old Nokia phones had very durable batteries and rarely shut down suddenly without external impact or intentional action. A technical officer checked the battery level in the system data and found it was still sufficient. Since 2002 technology did not allow precise location via signal like later years, police could not determine where the phone was turned off. All they knew was when it stopped sending signals to the nearest tower. With no signs of hardware damage or software error, the possibility of the phone being manually shut off became the hypothesis recorded in the analysis report. The investigation team reviewed Ellie's contacts for relationships outside her friends and family, but the contact list was entirely ordinary. A few classmates, some old co-workers, relatives, and service numbers like taxis, restaurants, or clinics. No strange contacts, no unread messages from unknowns. The fact that Ellie did not call for help, did not text friends after leaving Tom, and left no messages indicating trouble puzzled police. It could mean no incident occurred immediately after leaving the car, or it could imply that whatever happened to Ellie was too quick for her to use the phone. Police also noted no messages or calls from Ellie after the camera captured her silhouette on Western Bank, further highlighting the sudden nature of the disappearance. This scant data was entered into the case file, adding to the overall picture that still had too many gaps. With the phone, messages, calls, and contacts yielding no clear clues about Ellie's direction or who she met, the investigation team had to acknowledge that her communication trail ended as abruptly as her figure vanished from the streetlights, an unusual silence containing no explanation, only leaving the question of who or what caused that phone to be fully turned off right after she stepped into the darkness of Western Bank. Immediately after completing the analysis of Ellie's communications data, South Yorkshire Police launched the next phase, a wide-area ground search, a highly resource-intensive task, but one that had to be conducted as soon as possible before traces were erased by weather, foot traffic, or urban activity. A city map was spread out on the table in the temporary meeting room near the city center, with 4 key areas marked in red circles: Weston Park, Crooks Valley Park, Rivlin Valley, and Neepsend Industrial Area. These were the zones Ellie might have inadvertently turned into if she changed direction after stepping out of the last camera's view, or places she might have been forced to go if someone intervened. The search team was divided into 4 corresponding groups, each led by an officer experienced in missing persons cases. At Weston Park, the first team began sweeping from the southern edge connecting to Western Bank, following the paved paths winding around the small lake in the park. Tall elm trees lined both sides, casting thick shadows, with the ground covered in wet leaves like a continuous brown-gray carpet that was constantly slippery underfoot. Search dogs were released along the loops, sniffing every bush and tree base for signs of disturbance. They checked the old restroom building, empty benches, and side paths leading behind the museum building, but everything was silent as usual, revealing nothing related to Ellie. Early morning light filtered through the canopy, but reflected off no noteworthy objects, and the Weston Park team had to move deeper into the park, near the western boundary where foot traffic was lowest. Not far away, the second team entered Crooks Valley Park, an area considered more sensitive due to its steep terrain and many shortcuts down to the lake in the valley. This was also a place police thought Ellie might have gone if she instinctively left Western Bank to avoid busier areas. The water rescue unit checked the lake from the start, launching small boats and using long poles to probe every square meter of the still water. On shore, search dogs ran parallel along the winding paths around the lake, occasionally sniffing intensely at a spot, but then moving on without a confirmed scent. As the group swept to the northern edge of the park, where a narrow trail descended to the road connecting to residential streets, one officer spotted a small object near the edge of some bushes. It was a woman's shoe, soaked from overnight dew, with the sole showing a few thin mud streaks, in a light color quite similar to the shoes Ellie usually wore according to her friend's descriptions. The officer immediately called for scene photography, marked the shoe's position, and used specialized gloves to collect it. However, no one declared it belonged to Ellie. All evidence had to be examined in the lab before conclusions. What drew attention was not the shoe's shape, but its location in a concealed spot, several meters off the main path, where someone casually walking would rarely step. The shoe's appearance was not only recorded, but added to the search map as a point for further checks when expanding the area. The Crooks Valley Park team continued sweeping the rest of the park, but found nothing else. At the same time, the third team worked in Rotherham Valley, an area with lightly dense woodland and winding walking trails along a small stream. Due to the wide area and many branches, police deployed both search dogs and officers experienced in hilly terrain to search through thick bushes. Wind rustling through the canopy created constant noise, sometimes drowning out footsteps, but no unusual objects appeared. This team assessed that Rotherham Valley might be outside Ellie's movement path, unless she deliberately turned from Weston Park, but they still covered the entire area to rule out her being injured and stuck somewhere. The final team reached Neepsend Industrial Area, an old industrial zone scattered with steel warehouses, abandoned factories, and vacant lots. The terrain here was the most complex, with many unfinished structures and dark side paths, but for that very reason, police could not overlook it. They went through each old warehouse, shining lights into dark corners where torn metal roofs left hazy gaps, checking lots with shallow pits and areas that could conceal an injured person. However, after hours of searching, the team found no signs related to Ellie. Establishing a search grid across 4 different areas required the entire unit to coordinate closely, reporting continuously to confirm covered zones and any overlooked spots. Besides the shoe found in Crooks Valley Park, police collected no other evidence throughout that morning and afternoon. Though the shoe could be an initial lead, they remained cautious. Discarded shoes in parks are not uncommon, and whether it related to Ellie depended entirely on lab analysis. As the teams packed up equipment and regrouped at the temporary command point, the summary report showed that despite the expanded and thorough search, all traces beyond the shoe remained out of reach, leaving a large unanswered gap. It was precisely that gap, along with the shoe found at the edge of Crooks Valley Park, that forced the police to shift direction toward the only method that could compensate for the blind spots on the ground: analyzing the entire network of cameras within a 1-kilometer radius of the location where Ellie was last seen. Because Sheffield, in 2002, did not yet have the dense CCTV network it would 2 decades later, collecting the footage was far from straightforward. Officers had to visit every shop, every pub, every bus stop, and every building equipped with a camera to request whatever recordings still remained, most of them stored on VHS tapes or monochrome magnetic tapes, low resolution and prone to noise, if the tape was old. Inside the temporary image processing room set up at the station near the city center, multiple tape players and CRT monitors glowed simultaneously, each device running a different scene from Sheffield during the hours from late evening to early morning. The technical officers played through each tape in turn, numbering every camera by location and logging timestamps based on the displayed data or estimated from the rhythm of street activity. Their goal was not only to find Ellie, but to piece together every possible step she might have taken in the brief minutes after leaving Tom's car. The cameras along West Street captured the chaotic crowd spilling out onto the road from the pubs, flashing neon lights, people laughing and talking, shadows blending together under the damp yellow glow. Thanks to these cameras, police could confirm that Ellie left the pub normally, walking with her group of friends before turning toward where Tom had parked, with no one following her. Video from a convenience store camera near Rockingham Street showed the two of them standing beside each other in the car, then Ellie's figure leaving the passenger door and walking out of frame. This was the last point at which a camera clearly recorded her image. From there onward, police had to rely on cameras located farther away, devices that were never designed to clearly capture individual pedestrians at night. One camera mounted on the corner of a building at Western Bank caught Ellie walking toward the Arts Tower. Quick steps, compact build, her light-colored jacket reflecting the dim yellow streetlights. But only seconds later, as Ellie passed through a stretch of road obscured by large tree shadows, her image began to fade. Once she moved beyond the reach of the streetlights, the camera recorded only a dark patch blending into the night background, making it extremely difficult to determine exactly which way she turned. The officers quickly realized that Western Bank, with its rows of old trees and wide gaps between lampposts, created countless visual gaps, areas where even the presence of a 2002-era camera could not produce a clear enough image. Another camera positioned on the library building, facing the walkway around the Arts Tower, provided a blurry but valuable clip. For a few brief seconds, a tall male figure appeared at the edge of the frame. The man was standing in backlighting, reducing his shape to a black silhouette against the faint glow of wall lights. He appeared to be heading toward the Arts Tower area, on the same timeline as Ellie, but the camera captured no interaction between them, nor did it clearly show the man's face or clothing. The technical team tried brightening the frame using the simple processing software available at the time, but increasing the brightness only added more noise, white specks scattering across the screen and making the male figure even less identifiable. One officer noted that the man had a long stride and straight posture, steady steps suggesting height well above average, but this observation remained purely descriptive and could not be used as evidence. Moving on to cameras along the side street connecting Weston Park to the student accommodation area, they encountered the same issues: weak lighting, low contrast, and poor tape quality, turning every human figure into vague moving blobs in the darkness. A few frames showed figures crossing the road, but the resolution was so low that gender or clothing could not be determined. Police used synchronization markers to align the cameras, setting the same timestamps based on vehicle movement, traffic lights, and any functioning on-screen clocks. This synchronization allowed them to reconstruct the entire flow of movement around the area where Ellie had been, from West Street to Brook Hill, and from Brook Hill up to Western Bank. When the clips were stitched together in chronological order, Ellie's route emerged with frequent interruptions. Some cameras showed her direction of travel, but between those cameras were long stretches where no human figure appeared at all, even though Ellie must have walked through them. This led to the conclusion that the city in 2002 contained camera dead zones, places completely unmonitored, where anyone entering effectively vanished from both human and mechanical witnesses. During the video review, no camera captured Ellie turning back, changing direction, or approaching an unfamiliar vehicle, allowing police to rule out the possibility that she left the area by vehicle immediately after parting from Tom. However, the appearance of the tall male figure near the Arts Tower was the only detail that did not fully align with prior assumptions. Officers reviewed it multiple times, playing frame by frame, trying to sharpen the silhouette, but ultimately had to accept that the footage was too blurry for identification. When they marked the figure's position on the map, it fell exactly within the boundary area between the library camera and the Western Bank camera, two locations already identified as having high rates of blind spots. This raised the question, were Ellie and the male figure following the same route? Was he walking just ahead or just behind her? But the lighting too poor for the camera to capture both. There was no clear answer. The analysis team continued with another camera mounted high on a building near the engineering department. From that elevated view, they saw a few scattered figures moving during the time Ellie might have passed, but none matched her build or that of the man because the distance was too great. Only tiny dark specks on a gray road surface remained. After many hours examining dozens of tapes, the technical team concluded that Sheffield's 2002 camera system could only provide the skeleton of what had happened, not a record of every footstep taken by a pedestrian in the dark. They prepared a report. Ellie's last clear appearance was on the Western Bank camera. She then moved into the darkened area near the Arts Tower. A tall male figure appeared at the same time in the vicinity. The gaps between cameras were wide enough that any event could occur without being recorded. Everything obtained from the cameras only outlined the edges of the story, while the middle, the minutes when Ellie disappeared from every image, remained shrouded in darkness, just like the stretch of road she had walked into that night. After reviewing the entire camera network and identifying the large gaps where no device could record Ellie's footsteps, police shifted to examining traffic activity that night, an essential approach to rule out the possibility that Ellie had accidentally or been forced into a vehicle after leaving Western Bank. Since the time of her disappearance fell on a weekend, night bus routes were sparse but still operated full schedules to serve students and late shift workers. So the investigation team began by checking the journey logs of all routes passing through the area around Brook Hill Roundabout and Western Bank. The city bus company provided precise timetables for the vehicles that night, including routes 52, 95, and 120. The ones considered most likely for Ellie to encounter. When police tracked down the driver of one bus that passed Brook Hill at the time Ellie might have been there, the driver vaguely recalled seeing a woman run across the road in front of the bus, small build, wearing light-colored clothing, but since the bus was moving, he could not observe her face or clothing details closely. He said the situation happened very quickly. A figure appeared at the edge of the road, dashed to the other side, then disappeared behind a parked car near the slope. He could not confirm it was Ellie. He was not even sure whether the person was wearing a hat, and the dim streetlights near dawn made the memory even less reliable. Police recorded this statement, but remained cautious, since a woman running across the road at that hour was not unusual in Sheffield, especially near the student area. When checking the cameras mounted on the buses, police faced the same problems as with city cameras. The images were too blurry, reflected by interior bus lights, turning any figure outside the windows into unrecognizable dark patches. No video data provided additional support for the driver's account. Police then worked with taxi companies operating on West Street and nearby areas that night. That street was a common place for people to call taxis home to halls or houses after drinking, so checking trip records was necessary. However, taxi company databases at the time lacked GPS tracking or detailed journey logs. They only kept lists of phone bookings and occasional driver notes if something unusual occurred. After reviewing everything, police found no bookings from a woman matching Ellie's description, and no driver picked up a fare in the relevant area near the time of her disappearance. The drivers brought in for questioning gave similar answers. None remembered picking up a young woman alone at Brook Hill during the specified window. Those who took fares on West Street said the area was busy, so they focused on customers waiting at taxi ranks rather than lone pedestrians on the slope. This led police to lean toward the hypothesis that Ellie did not take a taxi that night, or if she approached any vehicle, it was not through a registered taxi service. To rule out the possibility that Ellie was picked up or forced into a private car by someone she knew, police examined all traffic cameras along Western Bank and Brook Hill for signs of a vehicle stopping abruptly or turning into the area off-route. However, no vehicle was recorded stopping at the curb during the relevant time frame, nor did any show hazard lights or unusual behavior. Officers also considered whether Ellie might have gotten into a car with friends or an acquaintance passing by, but the list of friends confirmed in earlier statements showed no one from the group left the pub by car, except Tom. Other private vehicles visible on camera were simply passing through normally, with no signs of slowing or interacting with pedestrians. After compiling all information from bus routes, taxis, and private vehicles, police concluded there was no evidence Ellie left the area by public transport or private car. This meant that Ellie's next movement, or that of anyone approaching her, lay entirely outside the scope of that night's traffic surveillance, returning the path to her disappearance to the largest blind spot. the dark, unmonitored, low-traffic area around the Arts Tower and Weston Park, where she had walked in and then vanished from every frame. As the lines of inquiry involving cameras, traffic, and witness statements gradually closed, without yielding clear leads, the investigation team began shifting focus to reviewing the records of individuals known to be near the area where Ellie disappeared at the relevant time. Most notably security guard Darren Cole, the person confirmed to be on night duty directly along the route Ellie took. Police reviewed the campus security shift roster at the University of Sheffield for the week of the incident and saw Darren's name listed for the late evening to early morning shift, exactly matching the time frame when Ellie was captured on camera and then vanished. The recorded patrol route in the internal log showed Darren was responsible for covering the Arts Tower area, the stretch behind the library, and the edge of Weston Park, locations that overlapped completely with the blind spots on Ellie's path. Consequently, although he initially appeared only as a witness, police began scrutinizing his statements more closely. They pulled Darren's personnel file from the university security department and quickly noticed a detail that caught their attention just a few months earlier. Darren had received a formal warning for inappropriate conduct toward a female student after she complained that he had followed her closely on a quiet evening, standing too near while she locked her bicycle, making her feel unsafe. The incident was not serious enough for disciplinary action or criminal investigation, but the security department had counseled him and required him to improve his interactions with students. The note was brief but sufficient for police to consider him for deeper evaluation. When comparing Darren's statement with camera data and the logged patrol route, police identified several minor discrepancies. Darren said he only passed through Weston Park at the start of his shift and did not return to that area afterward, but according to the log, the zone required rechecking after midnight, the exact time Ellie passed through. When questioned again about this detail, Darren replied that the night had been quiet, he could not recall every street he took, and sometimes he adjusted his route based on real-time conditions. However, the vagueness of his explanation and lack of specific timestamps led officers to add a note beside his statement, not incriminating evidence, but a detail that could not be ignored when cross-referencing all information. Additionally, when police asked Darren whether he had seen Ellie or any young woman passing the Arts Tower during that window, he answered no, saying the area was virtually empty. This response did not directly contradict the cameras, but aligned suspiciously well with the exact stretch no camera could cover, the zone Ellie entered, and then disappeared from. One officer asked Darren whether he had lingered in the corridor behind the Arts Tower, an area confirmed as a complete blind spot, but Darren shook his head, saying he only checked there when specifically requested, and not that night. When cross-checked against the shift log, police noted that the check rear corridor entry was not marked complete, yet an earlier page stated the route was routinely checked regardless of incidents. This inconsistency placed Darren further into the category requiring closer scrutiny. The investigation team contacted the university HR department for more insight into Darren's workplace demeanor. A supervisor described him as generally quiet, reserved, completing tasks by the book, but occasionally overly rigid when dealing with students. Some of his warnings were described as contextually inappropriate or excessively stern. No one called Darren dangerous, but his portrayal in internal reports suggested a personality that was not entirely predictable. Police also checked Darren's personal record through force archives. No prior convictions, no history of violence, no serious violations. This meant he was not a clear suspect by legal standards, and any analysis had to rely entirely on statements, behavior, and inconsistencies in his patrol route. Nevertheless, the geographical coincidence he was the only person reasonably present in the area where Ellie vanished, forced police to consider him carefully. When pressed further about the exact timing of passing near the library, Darren responded with highly cautious answers, often circling around, not remembering precisely, or nothing special that night. At this point, the investigation team noted in their report that while Darren's statements were not sufficient to treat him as a suspect, they were also not clear enough to fully exclude him from further monitoring. However, everything remained at the evaluation stage. There was no physical evidence directly linking Darren to Ellie, no camera capturing him approaching her, and no witness seeing them near each other. Within the legal framework at the time, police could not take any further steps beyond keeping Darren in the potential interest category and continuing to note every minor discrepancy related to him. In closing the report, the lead officer affirmed that although Darren occupied the overlap of multiple blind spots and his route showed signs of inconsistency, there existed no legal or physical basis for deeper measures. The case, therefore, had to return to what was known: a young woman walking into darkness and a security guard coincidentally present in the same area. But the information gap between the two remained too wide to connect into a coherent investigative direction. Despite conducting extensive searches over many days, collecting footage from cameras, evaluating witness statements, and examining individuals present in the area where Ellie disappeared, the investigation began to stall as no leads progressed in a definitive direction. All the police had was a fragmented timeline. Ellie left the pub in a normal state, exited Tom's car after a brief argument, was captured on camera walking up Western Bank, and then completely vanished into the dark area between blind spots. The shoe found in Crooks Valley Park remained unconfirmed, preventing it from becoming a starting point for a new line of inquiry, and technical teams, after multiple assessments, concluded that the 2002 camera quality was insufficient to recover any additional details. The appearance of a male figure near the Arts Tower, the frame everyone hoped could be the key, ultimately provided no identification value, as the noise was too high and the image too blurry to determine who it was. Meanwhile, lists of buses, taxis, and private vehicles showed no one picking up or meeting Ellie, and traffic checks revealed no vehicles stopping abruptly or exhibiting unusual behavior. All possible routes Ellie might have taken were searched multiple times, but no signs of disturbance appeared. No belongings were left behind, and no physical evidence indicated she had been attacked or involved in an accident. The only evidence the police had remained Ellie's sudden disappearance, something that could not immediately be classified as criminal. Upon reviewing the entire file related to Darren Cole, the police were forced to admit that although his statement contained many inconsistencies, there was no physical evidence or witness placing him near Ellie after the last camera sighting. Darren had no prior convictions, no history of violence, and while previous cautioned behaviors made him a person of interest, they only amounted to inappropriate conduct, insufficient to designate him as a formal suspect. More experienced officers in the investigation team also reminded that suspicion alone was never enough to charge someone, and without any concrete evidence, the police could not continue pressuring a security worker based solely on geographic coincidence and vague statements. As the first week after Ellie's disappearance passed, a comprehensive case report was submitted to senior command. The content clearly showed no signs of criminal activity. No witnesses saw Ellie being coerced. No physical evidence pointed to violence. No camera captured any suspicious interaction clear enough to identify individuals, and no communication data suggested she was lured to meet someone. Meanwhile, the possibility that Ellie left the area voluntarily, though not a strong hypothesis, could not be entirely ruled out, as the case lacked sufficient clues to form a specific conclusion. With all these limitations, the police had no choice but to suspend active investigation to avoid wasting resources without a clear direction. The Ellie Hart file was reclassified and shifted to passive monitoring status, meaning it would only be reopened upon receipt of new credible information. A final note was added to the file: no identified victim, no identified crime, no identified suspect. Case classified no further lines of inquiry and transferred to cold case. As the red stamp was applied to the last page, Ellie Hart, the girl who walked into the darkness of Western Bank, officially became a cold case among countless unsolved missing persons cases in the early years of the new century. 14 years passed since Ellie Hart disappeared, and the Neepsend area, once part of old industrial Sheffield, with abandoned factories, rusted steel warehouses, and scattered wasteland along the canal, was being redeveloped into a new commercial and residential complex. Bulldozers, shipping containers, and scaffolding covered the entire site that had once been a cargo hub during the steel industry's heyday. On an early morning in late May 2016, while a construction crew was demolishing the old concrete foundation of an abandoned warehouse, the heavy excavator bucket suddenly stopped after a soft impact, not the usual metallic clang, but something brittle and fragile. A curious worker climbed down to check, expecting just rubble or broken concrete, but as he bent down and brushed away the gray soil mixed with cement dust, a pale yellowish curved shape emerged from the dirt, causing him to jolt back immediately. His first thought was animal bones, but after a few seconds of observation, he realized the size and shape matched nothing the site had encountered before. He called his colleagues, and as they shone flashlights into the area, more fragments appeared, all bearing the distinctive features of human bones. The site manager immediately ordered all work halted, covered the area with tarps, and called 999. Within less than 20 minutes, the first police car arrived, immediately cordoning off the area with yellow tape and requiring all workers to leave the suspected zone. A CSI team was dispatched shortly after, bringing scene recording equipment and meticulous excavation tools. The Sheffield sky that day was heavily overcast, with low clouds threatening rain, but the officers did not wait. They had to collect evidence before weather conditions or site winds disturbed any critical details. As the soil was scraped away centimeter by centimeter, the clear outline of a human skeleton gradually emerged in an old depression beneath the warehouse foundation. The bones were heavily decomposed, showing the fragmentation of time, but the basic structure of the skull and long bones was sufficient for officers to determine. This was not a recent case, but remains that had lain there for many years. Equally notable was that the body was not exposed but buried in a thin layer of soil directly under the cement, indicating this was not a natural death in a public place. As the area around the remains was expanded, one officer found a small piece of pale gray fabric, soiled and frayed at the edges. It was picked up with specialized tweezers and placed in a sealed evidence bag per standard procedure. Another officer discovered a single trainer shoe lying more than a meter from the skeleton, worn and so saturated with soil that the original color was unrecognizable. Nearby was a thin metal bracelet-like ring, possibly a personal accessory, rusted but still intact in shape. Each piece of evidence was numbered, photographed in place, and collected according to protocol, with no one daring to touch anything directly, unsure what might be a crucial piece in an unforeseen story. As the excavation proceeded, a veteran SIPE officer stood by the pit, looking at the skeleton, and the first question that came to mind was whether these remains connected to any of the city's unsolved missing persons cases over the decades. Sheffield had several unresolved disappearances, most forgotten or forever cold cases, but the report of a young woman vanishing without trace in 2002, the Ellie Hart case, still lingered in the memory of a few officers from that era. As the evidence was transported to the forensics lab, one duty officer, while reviewing long-term missing persons lists, paused at Ellie's file. The discovery location, Neepsend Industrial Area, was not in the 2002 search zones, but close enough to routes Ellie might have been forced onto. Moreover, the recovered trainer shoe closely matched the style described by Ellie's friends. No one dared confirm anything without forensic analysis, but the similarities were strong enough to report to superiors that this skeletal discovery might link to one of the city's most significant missing persons cases. A formal request was sent, reopen the Ellie Hart file after 14 years on ice. No one said it aloud, but in that moment, everyone present felt the shift in the air. A case thought swallowed by time was returning, with the skeleton under the old cement foundation serving as a reminder that silence was never truly the end. The remains found at Neepsend were transferred the same day to the South Yorkshire Police Forensics Lab, where the examination team began a meticulous analysis process standard for cases suspected of linking to long-term missing persons files. As the skeleton was placed on the examination table, Technicians quickly noted the deep decomposition, consistent with a body buried for over a decade. Nevertheless, some structures remained intact enough for analysis. They started with the most classic method, dental examination. Though the jawbone had cracks in places, many teeth were still present, especially the molars and lower incisors. Forensics took dental impressions and compared them to Ellie Hart's 1999 paper dental records submitted by her family when she disappeared. Matching point by point on tooth surfaces, from wear patterns, minor cracks to old fillings, they quickly determined a perfect match with Ellie's records. A report was signed confirming the remains found at Neepsend were Ellie Hart. Confirming identity was only the first step. With the victim identified, the forensics team moved to analyzing bone conditions to determine what happened to Ellie before and after death. On the skull, they found a notable injury. A small depression above the left cheekbone, not fragmentation from time, but showing signs of strong impact before death. The edges of the injury were somewhat sharp, not rounded like decay cracks, indicating the bone was impacted while relatively fresh. This did not reveal anything definitive. It could have been a hard fall onto a surface or impact from an object. But the sensitive location led examiners to note it as significant. Additionally, ribs showed no fractures, and arm and leg bones had no clear cracks, indicating no widespread violent impacts. However, high decomposition made determining cause of death nearly impossible. All the forensics team could say was that Ellie sustained facial impact force before death, or in circumstances leading to it. Next was analysis of soil adhering to bone parts. Soil samples from multiple points around the body were compared to soil at the discovery site and cross-referenced with 2002 Sheffield area samples stored in local geological databases. Results showed the soil tightly adhering to bone surfaces was completely unlike Neepsend soil, different mineral composition, different clay content, and even organic humus particles, matching park or green area soil, rather than industrial. This led to a key conclusion. Ellie's body was buried elsewhere before being moved to Neepsend. The stark difference between original soil in bone crevices and overlying industrial soil made this hypothesis nearly certain, with forensics also noting the possibility the body was temporarily buried then exhumed or dragged from another area before burial under the warehouse foundation. Some fabric fragments from the scene were analyzed for fibers. As they were decayed and torn to thin strips, the team used microscopes for fiber structure. Through chemical composition testing, they identified the main fiber as polyester cotton blend, woven in a pattern characteristic of thin jackets used as campus security uniforms at the University of Sheffield in the early 2000s. Forensics did not conclude who wore the uniform, but noted the fibers matched the type used by university security in 2001. 2003, confirmed via internal university archive checks. This was unexpected, as Neepsend had no connection to campus, and no reason for such uniform fabric near the body without some contact during Ellie's disappearance period. Another notable evidence was dark gray nylon fibers adhering to leg bones. Upon analysis, they were identified as fibers used in trunk carpeting common in many late 1990s vehicle models. The nylon composition was stable, often in hatchbacks and small sedans. Though specific vehicle tracing was impossible from carpet fibers alone, forensics noted their presence indicated Ellie's body contacted a vehicle trunk during post-death or transport. The simultaneous presence of campus security uniform fabric and old vehicle trunk nylon carpet fibers on the bones led the forensics team to conclude these were not coincidental. Upon re-examining bone surfaces microscopically, they found outer industrial soil adhered less than the fibers, meaning fibers likely attached before burial under the warehouse foundation. The final forensics report, signed by the team leader, summarized key findings. Victim is Ellie Hart. Body shows pre-death facial trauma. Body was buried or placed in different soil composition area before Neepsend transfer, and body contacted campus security uniform type fabric and late 1990 is vehicle trunk carpet. No one in the lab said it aloud, but the concurrent traces made them realize Ellie Hart's 14-year-old disappearance was not simply a nighttime Sheffield vanishing, but a chain of human-involved events, concealed in silence for over a decade. When the 2016 forensic report was transferred to the cold case investigation team, it became the starting point for a comprehensive review of everyone who had been documented in the 2002 files, forcing the officers to re-examine every name, every statement, and every detail that had once been deemed insufficiently significant. The first thing they did was eliminate those who were definitively unrelated. Tom Wilkes, Ellie's boyfriend, who was the last person to see her, was re-examined through all the old documents and any new information that could be cross-referenced. In 2002, police had checked his phone records, work schedule, statements from friends, and witness accounts to confirm his presence at the recorded locations, and everything matched. In 2016, the investigation team again requested the extraction of archived old data, cross-referencing it with whatever remained in the phone databases and the reports from the car company where Tom worked at the time. There were no discrepancies whatsoever. Moreover, forensics found no traces linked to Tom in any of the evidence collected from the remains. This completely cleared him from the suspect list. Ellie's group of friends, those who attended the birthday party with her, were also reviewed. The initial files showed they had no motive whatsoever, and the West Street camera confirmed they left the area as a group and split up on different routes. The 2016 police rechecked the archived footage, and although the images were blurry and low resolution, there was no evidence that they followed Ellie or appeared in the area where she disappeared. The pub patrons were also re-examined through staff lists, payment receipts, and internal pub cameras. No one had any connection or unusual interaction with Ellie sufficient to warrant further consideration. Once the obvious names were eliminated, the investigation team turned back to what had stumped them the most: the mysterious figure appearing in the video camera near the Arts Tower. In 2002, police lacked the technology to enhance the noisy, blurry footage, but by 2016, digital image enhancement software allowed them to clarify the outlines of movement, body proportions, and gait of the person in the frame. The technicians reloaded the original from storage, carefully digitizing each frame before feeding it into reconstruction software. Although the image was still not sharp enough to identify a face, parameters such as height, stride length, and shoulder tilt indicated the figure was approximately over 1.80 meters tall, with an upright posture, long strides, and a steady rhythm of movement. When cross-referenced with the 2002 campus security personnel data, only a few individuals matched that height range, including Darren Cole, who had appeared in the files due to being near the area where Ellie disappeared and having inconsistent statements. These parameters were not definitive proof, but when combined with the timeline, they revealed a notable coincidence. The time the figure appeared near the Arts Tower matched the shift log hour when Darren was assigned to patrol that area. The investigation team decided to input this data into the Gosford chart, a behavioral analysis system, and suspect relevance scoring based on a set of factors: potential motive, opportunity for access, fit with the location, inconsistencies in statements, and other objective data. In the Gosford chart, each factor is scored from low to high based on the degree of connection to the case. When Darren was entered into the system, his score for location at the time of the incident rose high because his shift placed him exactly in the area where Ellie disappeared. The geographic proximity score was also high because his patrol route covered the entire camera blind spot region. The prior behavior factor scored medium, but still notable due to him having been reprimanded for inappropriate conduct toward female students. Meanwhile, the statement inconsistencies factor was rated high because the details Darren provided in 2002 did not fully align with the shift log and camera footage. When totaled, Darren emerged with the highest connection score compared to other suspects. The cold case team realized that although in 2002 they could not pursue further due to lack of evidence, the 2016 context was entirely different. The identity of the remains was confirmed. The discovery location indicated the victim had been moved, and evidence such as uniform fabric fibers and nylon fibers from a car mat suggested close contact between Ellie and someone connected to the campus or a vehicle. When piecing all this data together, Darren Cole became the top suspect in the analysis chart. No longer just due to positional coincidence, but also because the forensic results inadvertently reinforced the suspicions around him. Although all these conclusions remained at the level of theoretical analysis and could not be considered charging evidence, the cold case team understood that to unravel both ends of a story, seemingly closed 14 years earlier, they had to start over from that very blurry shadow captured in the frame of an old camera, and the only person matching that shadow was Darren Cole. When the Gosford chart identified Darren Cole as the suspect with the highest connection score, the cold case investigation team decided to move to the next step, tracing his current life to re-verify all the elements overlooked in 2002. After Ellie's disappearance, Darren continued working at the University of Sheffield for another 2 years before moving to other security positions, then leaving Sheffield entirely around 2008. The 2016 residency data showed he was living in Rotherham, in a quiet terraced housing area for middle-aged workers. As the investigating officers sat in the meeting room and unfolded a large map of South Yorkshire, they realized the distance from Sheffield to Rotherham was not far. But the 14-year time gap required a highly cautious approach to contacting Darren. Instead of direct contact right away, they chose to start by reviewing his past financial records, owned vehicles, work history, and housing history to see if anything intersected with the forensic results. The first step was checking the vehicle records registered under Darren. In the DVLA archives, the team found 3 cars he owned between 1999 and 2007, including a late 1990s hatchback, declared heavily damaged after a collision in 2003. This car immediately drew the team's attention because forensics had determined the nylon fibers adhering to Ellie's bones were from the standard trunk mat type common in many small cars of that era. Police forwarded the accident file to the Traffic Police's Forensic Vehicle Archive and received a technical description. The trunk mat of the model Darren owned matched exactly the fiber type found in the remains. Although it could not be confirmed this was the exact vehicle involved in moving Ellie's body, this coincidence fell right into the critical zone marked by the Gosford chart, prompting the team to cautiously note that the compatibility between the evidence and Darren's vehicle was of high concern. The second step was tracing the locations Darren worked after leaving campus security. Employment records showed he worked as a security guard in various warehouses, industrial areas, and storage yards around Sheffield, including 2 in the Neepsend industrial area range. One was an old warehouse of a transport company, less than 400 meters from where the remains were found, where Darren worked night shifts in 2002-2003. When the cold case team received this information, the meeting room fell silent. This was the first concrete data placing Darren in Neepsend during the period Ellie went missing. Moreover, his shifts in that period aligned with access to abandoned areas before redevelopment projects began years later. The officers continued flipping through the old records of the now bankrupt transport company stored in business archives. Among the yellowed paper files, they found an internal note describing Darren being assigned to check the rear fencing system of the warehouse, a location quite close to where the remains were discovered. Although it was just a routine activity note, Darren's presence in that area during 2000-2003 became an additional piece fitting into the picture they were trying to reconstruct. When reviewing all the timestamps in Darren's employment records, police noticed something else. He quit the transport company job just a few months after Ellie's disappearance, then moved to another security position farther from Neepsend. This change was not unusual enough to be considered suspicious, but when placed alongside the forensic data and enhanced camera results, it created an indirect but noteworthy link. The investigation team then requested extraction of Darren's payroll data and patrol routes from campus security in 2002 to reconfirm his presence on the shift the night Ellie disappeared. Reanalysis showed he indeed started his shift around the time Ellie left the pub in Tom's car. But when cross-referencing the logged patrol route with the 2016 enhanced camera results, the team found that the period Darren claimed to be in a more populated area overlapped with the time the male figure appeared near the Arts Tower. His 2002 statement had been viewed as inconsistent, but not strong enough to be deemed contradictory. However, from the 2016 perspective, this coincidence carried entirely different weight. After reviewing personnel files, the team accessed the campus security internal disciplinary archive. There, they found a 2002 complaint submitted by a student, reporting Darren standing too close to her in a dark area behind the library, making her frightened. The incident was handled with a mild warning, but when placed alongside the forensic pieces, inconsistent statements, and old car evidence, this complaint became an indicator of behavior potentially related to approaching female victims in low-light conditions. The investigation team continued checking Darren's current residence in Rotherham. They did not make direct contact, but quietly observed the living environment, a quiet area, terraced houses, neighbors, mostly retirees. His financial data showed unstable, but not criminal income or suspicious behavior in recent years. When the team mapped the timeline from 2002 to 2016, they saw Darren's movement from near the campus to Neepsend and then to Rotherham formed a logical chain tied to job changes. This did not prove guilt, but it showed Darren had never left South Yorkshire over the 14 years, making it easier for police to trace back any existing leads. When everything was compiled in the summary report, a clear picture emerged. Darren Cole had the opportunity to approach Ellie at the exact time, had a job in the area where the body was found, owned a vehicle with a matching nylon mat per forensics, and had indirect contact indicated by uniform fabric fibers in the evidence. No single factor was enough to charge him, but together they were sufficient to place him at the center of an expanded review. With each forensic piece, each line in the personnel files, and each former workplace, Darren Cole, who had quietly slipped out of the 2002 investigation, once again became the name circled in red on the board, forcing the entire cold case team to revisit from the beginning. Ellie Hart's journey on the last night she appeared amid the darkness of Sheffield, when data from forensics, enhanced camera footage, and employment records all pointed to Darren Cole as a prominent intersection point, the cold case investigation team decided to take a step they had never had the opportunity to pursue in 2002, legally searching the locations Darren had used, particularly the small storage unit he rented as a personal storage space from 2004 until 2010 on the outskirts of Rotherham. This unit was part of an old container complex, mostly used by locals to store household items, bicycles, or repair tools. Darren had terminated the contract long ago, but the records remained in the system, and the facility owner agreed to allow police access since the unit was currently empty and had not been re-rented. As the officers opened the door with a spare key, the smell of long accumulated dust mixed with rotting wood hit them immediately, and the dim light from flashlights swept across the narrow room of about 10 square meters. Inside, there wasn't much left. Some planks, old cardboard boxes, a broken chair, and a few rusted items. But in the back corner of the wall, where the flashlight beam lingered on the thick layer of dust, the officers spotted a black plastic bin, the kind of tool storage box commonly used by workers. It had no label on the outside, but the even layer of dust indicated it had been there for many years. Following procedure, they did not rush to open the lid, but photographed it from every angle, documented its position, then used gloves and specialized clamps to move the box to a brighter area. Once the ceiling was checked and recorded, an officer slowly pried open the lid with a tool, avoiding disturbing anything inside. The flashlight shone on the top layer of items, old papers, a few flyers, and a yellowed notebook. But what made the entire team freeze was a plastic student ID card, mixed in with the papers, its front slightly peeled, but still clearly readable. Ellie Hart. No one spoke, because this was a personal item, Ellie had carried in 2002, and it had never been found in any previous searches. Per procedure, the card was placed in an evidence bag and photographed in place, but the weight of the match thickened the air in the unit. An item like this could not accidentally appear in Darren's belongings without contact. As the officers carefully lifted the top layer of papers to examine the rest of the box, they discovered a beige cloth fragment, worn to the point of frayed edges, covered in dust, but still retaining its structure. It was folded unevenly, as if someone had stuffed it into the box just to hide it rather than preserve it. When unfolded under the flashlight and placed on an evidence tray, several faint dark brown stains appeared on the fabric. Forensics was immediately called to collect it properly. A few days later, preliminary lab results showed that the substance on the cloth was female DNA, and the extracted sample matched perfectly with Ellie's DNA profile obtained from family hair samples in 2002. This conclusion was reported to the investigation team. The cloth contained Ellie's DNA. The student ID belonged to Ellie. Both were found in a box of items Darren Cole had left in his personal storage unit. The appearance of two items belonging to Ellie in a space directly under Darren's control was nearly the clearest physical link since the day she disappeared. In the scene report, the officers detailed the box's position in the unit, the dust layer proving it had not been touched for years, and the chain of custody confirming Darren was the last person to rent the space before returning it. There was no reasonable explanation for Ellie's student ID appearing there without direct contact. The cloth bearing Ellie's DNA was even more compelling evidence, as confirmed by the family. Ellie never used that type of cloth in her daily life, let alone carried it on the night she vanished. It must have been an item placed on Ellie in a different space, at a different time, long enough to leave genetic traces. As the rest of the box was sifted through, the officers found no additional direct evidence, but these two items alone made the entire team realize this was a turning point. Each piece of evidence was resealed in anti-static bags and transported under specialized escort to the forensics lab for further analysis. While closing the search report, the team leader noted a short but heavy line, direct physical link Ellie Hart, Darren Cole established through seized evidence. Though the report did not yet state legal conclusions, everyone present understood that the old box in Darren's storage unit had just pushed the 14-year-old case beyond the threshold of suspicion and straight into territory no investigator could any longer take lightly. The territory of truths buried for over a decade. When Ellie Hart's student ID card and the cloth bearing her DNA were entered into the evidence report, the cold case team knew they had entered a phase that could no longer be delayed. Darren Cole had to be summoned for formal questioning, this time not as a vague witness like in 2002, but as the only person with a direct physical link to the victim. The interrogation took place at the main South Yorkshire Police Station in early October 2016. Darren was invited voluntarily per procedure, but from the moment he entered the room, his guarded demeanor made the officers realize this would not be an easy session. Initially, Darren sat upright, hands on the table, eyes fixed on the cold steel surface, as if weighing his every move. When asked again about basic details from his 2002 night shift, he repeated his old statement that he had never seen Ellie, that he only patrolled his usual route and noticed nothing unusual. But this time, police were not asking open-ended questions like in 2002. They had evidence in sealed bags on the table, enhanced camera timelines, and Darren's full employment records from Neepsend in 2002-2003. One officer began by presenting the timeline. We reanalyzed the footage with new technology. A figure matching your height and gait appears at the location where Ellie was last recorded. Darren glanced up briefly, then looked down again. He said the footage was blurry, that anyone could match that gait, but his quick response did not escape the eyes of those familiar with such defenses. When police moved to the critical part, they placed the sealed bag containing Ellie's student ID in front of Darren. He stared at it in complete silence. The interrogator asked, "How do you explain Ellie's student ID being found in the storage unit you rented for years?" Darren swallowed hard, then said he didn't know where the card came from, that someone might have put it there, or that he might have picked it up and forgotten. When pressed on why he would keep a missing person's student ID in his personal box, Darren said he might have stuffed it in without noticing. The vague, baseless explanation prompted the team to note, "Not credible." But the strongest psychological blow was yet to come. An officer produced the second sealed bag containing the cloth fragment with Ellie's DNA. "Do you want to explain how her DNA ended up on this item?" The interrogator's voice was not loud, but sharp as a cold blade. Darren shifted, leaning back, his face visibly paling. He said he had never met Ellie, had no reason to keep her belongings, and knew nothing about the cloth. The interrogator looked him straight in the eye and emphasized each word, "DNA doesn't appear by itself. The student ID didn't walk into your box, and Ellie didn't vanish on her own." Darren was silent for a long time. So long that an officer noted in the record, "Suspect displaying stress, loss of breathing control." As the interrogation moved to timeline confrontation, police presented evidence from the 2002 shift logs. They showed Darren's patrol route. He was supposed to be in the East Campus area at 0:45, but enhanced footage detected a figure of matching height near the Arts Tower, a spot Darren had previously claimed he did not pass. When asked why his timeline and the figure's position overlapped, Darren said he didn't remember, that the log might be wrong, that the camera proved nothing. But when police cross-referenced with 2002-2003 employment records at Neepsend, where Ellie's body was found 14 years later, and pointed out that Darren was not only near campus the night she vanished, but also worked exactly where the body was buried afterward, Darren's face twitched. This geographic link was not random coincidence, as he tried to portray, and the team immediately exploited the weakness. One officer asked directly, "You were at Neepsend in 2003. Why? And why was Ellie's body found right where you worked?" Darren denied it, saying he never accessed the back area, that he only patrolled assigned zones. But internal records police presented clearly showed fence-checking duties assigned to him on multiple nights. When confronted with the contradiction to his own statement, Darren had no answer. A long silence enveloped the room, so profound the air conditioning hum was audible. The interrogator decided on a direct attack. "You lied in 2002, now you're continuing to lie about not knowing Ellie. But we have evidence, DNA, timelines, and locations. We need one reason to believe you. Give us that reason." Darren bowed his head, hands clasped, knuckles white. He whispered that he didn't remember, that everything was hazy, that too much time had passed. But that was not an answer, it was collapse. When police presented the final analysis, that his 2002 timeline was impossible, that his separate shifts at Neepsend placed him in the body's movement path, that his box contained the victim's items, Darren had no reasonable defense left. He said someone might have put the card in the box. Police asked who, and he didn't answer. He said the cloth wasn't his. Police asked why Ellie's DNA was on it, and he fell silent in confusion. He said he only passed through Neepsend a few times, but records showed monthly work. Every word became evidence against him. When Darren tried a new explanation, that he might have picked up the card on campus and forgotten it in the box, police countered immediately. "What about the DNA on the cloth? Where did you pick that up?" "In the area where the body was later found." Darren fell silent, shaking his head without further words. The team did not need a confession. The law does not require it. They only needed to prove Darren could not provide any reasonable explanation for possessing items directly linked to the victim. As the interrogation ended, Darren could no longer maintain the calm he had when entering. He stood with difficulty, shoulders slumped, as if carrying an invisible weight. The officers left the room, conferred for 10 minutes, then returned with the decision recorded. Darren Cole detained on suspicion of unlawful killing and concealment of a body. No shouting, no resistance, just dead silence as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. In that moment, the 14-year silence, since the night Ellie Hart vanished, finally began to crack. The trial of Darren Cole at Sheffield Crown Court opened in early winter 2017, in a solemn yet heavy atmosphere, as if the ancient stone building itself sensed the arc of time spanning 15 years since the night Ellie Hart disappeared. As Darren was led into the courtroom, his eyes scanned the public gallery, then quickly dropped, looking like a man trying to shrink inside his thin old jacket. On the prosecution side, the CPS representative stated from the outset that this case was not merely a routine trial, but a reconstruction of a forensic data chain stretching from 2002 to 2016, a forensic chain linking evidence fragments buried in time, soil, and incomplete statements. The prosecutor stood, voice clear in the cold air. "We will prove that the defendant Darren Cole had contact with Ellie Hart on the night she vanished, caused her death under undisclosed circumstances, and actively concealed the body for 14 years. The jury sat in silence. The first evidence presented was the forensic chain identifying the remains. A dental expert described the 2016 dental comparison with Ellie's 1999 records, wear patterns, filling positions, tooth angles all matched perfectly, no possibility of error. Next, a bone expert analyzed the indentation on the left cheekbone, a trauma occurring while the bone was fresh, indicating impact before or at death, not natural decomposition. The prosecution's forensic document manager quoted the lab, "We cannot determine cause of death, but can confirm facial impact as a significant factor, inconsistent with natural fall." The jury took notes intently. After identity and trauma were established, prosecution moved to the core body movement. A geologist was called to the stand. He described the complete mismatch between soil and bone crevices and Neepsen soil, confirming Ellie had lain elsewhere before being moved to the old industrial site. This could only occur through intentional digging, moving, and reburial, he emphasized. Prosecution continued linking in 2002, 2003, Darren worked at a warehouse less than 400 meters from the discovery site. They presented employment records proving Darren had unsupervised access and routinely patrolled the rear fence area, exactly where a body could be brought unnoticed. Next came the most critical evidence, Ellie's student ID and the cloth with her DNA. The judge allowed each item in clear glass cases for the jury to view directly. The DNA expert detailed extraction, sample from cloth matches victim DNA perfectly, reliability over 99.99%, no chance of error. When asked about possible lab contamination, the expert replied firmly, "No. Samples processed independently, ISO standards. Unbroken chain of custody." Prosecution seized the decisive moment with a designed question pinning the case's focus. How did Ellie's DNA appear on an item found in Darren Cole's personal box if there was no contact between them? Defense objected as leading, but the judge allowed it since physical evidence requires direct explanation from the defendant. Next, prosecution presented 2002 camera footage enhanced with 2016 technology. They played the blurry library camera clip in court, enlarged and stabilized to clarify the figure in darkness. The expert described metrics, height, stride length, weight shift tilt, parameters significantly matched Darren Cole's height and gait, but not any other night shift guard. A comparison chart was projected, showing the video figure aligning more with Darren than anyone else. Prosecution then addressed the fabric fiber at the scene, polyester cotton identified as 2002 campus security uniform material. Kelly and Brown, the uniform supplier, provided confirmation documents. Prosecution asked, "Who wore this uniform type in 2002? University representative, only campus security. And on the night Ellie vanished, only 3 on duty, 2 captured on camera elsewhere. The remaining, Darren Cole." Each scattered 2002 clue was placed in 2016 forensic hands, and every piece pointed to one spot. Defense countered by arguing evidence was circumstantial only. They stressed no one saw Darren bury the body, no direct images, no witnesses to argument with Ellie. They claimed Darren's abandoned box could have been accessed by others. But prosecution immediately presented storage custody chain analysis, return records, confirming the unit unrented, and no break-in signs. If not Darren placing Ellie's card in the box, then who? And how did cloth with victim DNA appear in his items? Prosecution pressed. Darren took the stand and asserted innocence. He said he didn't know how Ellie's card appeared, didn't understand her DNA on the cloth, and that coincidences prove nothing. But under prosecution cross-examination, his testimony shifted repeatedly, sometimes never at Neeps and rear, other times maybe a few times, sometimes didn't know Ellie, yet might have seen her on campus, on patrol timeline blamed incorrect logs. Answers grew disjointed, fading, and one juror noted, incoherent, evasive. Prosecution concluded, we don't need a confession, we need truth reconstructed by science, and science speaks clearly. Ellie's evidence could only appear in space, controlled by Darren Cole, if he placed it there. No one else had opportunity, no one else motive in the same space and time. Darren sat silent, head down, hands clenched under the table. Though he continued denying murder, he could not refute the legal evidence, student ID, DNA on cloth, enhanced camera, uniform fiber, Neeps and work history, and inconsistent patrol route. As prosecution ended with the final line, not mere coincidence, but a chain of events, linked by the defendant's own traces, the courtroom fell silent, and the jury began to realize the 14-year silence had been broken by the evidence, speaking for the victim. When the jury returned to the courtroom, after nearly 2 days of deliberation, the atmosphere in Sheffield Crown Court grew so thick that every movement seemed to slow down, as if the room were holding its breath for an answer that had been hanging in suspense for 15 years. Darren Cole stood at the dock, hands clasped in front of his stomach, his eyes darting between unfamiliar faces. The judge asked the foreperson of the jury to stand. The foreperson, a middle-aged man, held a small sheet of paper in his hand and read slowly, each word falling into a terrifying silence. We, by a unanimous majority, find the defendant Darren Cole guilty of unlawful killing and concealment of a body. Darren closed his eyes for a moment, not collapsing, but as if trying to hold something inside. There were no shouts, no desperate protests, just the surrender of a man with no way back. The prosecution remained composed, while the public gallery, mostly Sheffield residents who had followed the case for years, exchanged silent glances. When the guilty verdict was announced, the judge moved straight to sentencing that same afternoon. He spoke in a low, steady voice, as if trying to contain the weight of each word. The court finds this case to be of exceptional gravity, not only because of the act that led to the victim's death, but also due to the deliberate, systematic, and prolonged efforts over 14 years to conceal the body of Ellie Hart. He paused briefly before continuing. Time does not diminish the seriousness of the crime. On the contrary, the length of time the victim was denied the truth makes the concealment an obvious aggravating factor. Darren looked down at the floor, his shoulders slumping, as if crushed by the weight of each word. The judge listed the categories of evidence the court had considered: the forensic identification of the remains, signs of facial trauma, the movement of the body, the presence of campus security uniform fabric fibers, the match between nylon fibers and Darren's old vehicle, physical evidence in the storage unit, and the defendant's repeatedly changing statements. No single factor could convict the defendant, the judge emphasized, but it is the interconnection of all of them, a consistent chain of logic, that has painted a clear picture of the defendant's actions on that night and in the days that followed. Turning to the assessment of the offense's danger, the judge said, "The defendant did not merely take the life of a young woman, he deprived her family of the truth for over a decade, leaving them with unresolved pain throughout that time. The preservation, movement, and burial of the body in an abandoned industrial area demonstrate a long-term intent to conceal, which the court regards as a particularly serious aggravating factor." The jury listened in silence. In the public gallery below, some covered their mouths with their hands. Others looked at the floor, as if trying to comprehend how a truth buried deep in the ground of Neepsend could become the verdict before their eyes. Darren remained silent, making no request to speak before sentencing. His lawyer, who had struggled throughout the trial to counter each piece of evidence, placed a hand on his shoulder for a few brief seconds, but said nothing. When everything was ready, the judge pronounced the sentence. For the offenses of unlawful killing and concealment of a body, the defendant Darren Cole is sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. He continued, "This sentence reflects the gravity of the offending, particularly the proactive concealment of the victim's body over a period of 14 years. The court considers this one of the rare cases where the passage of time forms a core part of the sentence, not to mitigate, but to establish the intentionality and the degree of cruelty in the concealment." Darren showed no strong reaction. He did not stand up, shout, or protest. He merely bowed his head slightly, clenched his hands, and allowed the police to lead him through the rear door of the court, like a man who had stood too long on the edge of an abyss with nothing left to hold on to. As the door closed behind him, the courtroom remained silent for a few more seconds, as if allowing the sentence to sink into the heavy air of Sheffield Crown Court. The judge concluded the proceedings with a short statement, "Justice delayed is not justice denied." And with those words, the sentence for Darren Cole officially closed the legal chapter of a story that the city of Sheffield had carried since a cold night in 2002. When the 30-year prison sentence for Darren Cole was handed down and the legal file was officially closed, the cold case investigation team from South Yorkshire Police began their final task, compiling a comprehensive concluding report that connected the entire investigative process, stretching from the night Ellie Hart disappeared in 2002 to the revelation of the truth in 2016. The report began by acknowledging that the initial investigation had been constrained by the technology of the time: sparse CCTV systems, low-quality footage, and a medium-risk classification that meant resources were not mobilized to the maximum level in the early stages. They pointed out that most of the shortcomings were not due to the investigators' competence, but to the technical context and procedural standards of that era. Cameras, unable to capture clear images in darkness, patrol teams without GPS to pinpoint officer locations, and search efforts relying more on statements and intuition than on objective data. A key point raised was the significant gap between scene investigation and the behavioral assessment of individuals present in the area. The 2002 records noted that Darren Cole had given inconsistent statements, but without physical evidence or clear footage, he was recorded only as a vague witness. The failure to more thoroughly check his actual route, shift times, or appearances near camera blind spots was a shortfall that the 2016 report frankly acknowledged. The cold case team also emphasized that the shoe found in Crooks Valley Park, not being subjected to biometric comparison or more complex analysis at the time, caused the investigation to lose a potential lead early on. Equally important was how the medium-risk missing person classification affected the response level. Had Ellie been classified as high risk from the start, patrols might have been expanded further, CCTV systems reviewed more urgently, and individuals working in the area, like Darren, approached sooner. The report stated clearly, a disappearance involving a young woman walking alone in a dark area, after leaving transport and carrying few personal items, should always be treated as higher than medium risk. Nonetheless, the team stressed that blame could not simply be assigned to procedures. The technology and data available at the time did not allow Ellie's final movements to be reconstructed. The sections related to the 2002 cameras were cited as clear evidence. Only with enhanced technology in 2016 could the figure near the Arts Tower be analyzed to the point of identifying body shape. One of the biggest lessons recorded was the importance of a forensic chain spanning many years. Without the combination of bone examination, soil comparison, fiber analysis, DNA, and old vehicle records, the case would have remained in a state of doubt. The report emphasized, no single piece of evidence was sufficient on its own to reopen the case, but the accumulation of many small details created the path to the truth. The final section of the conclusion devoted an important paragraph to recognizing the significance of the investigation. The discovery of Ellie Hart's body after 14 years is not the end of a case, but a reminder of our responsibility toward every missing person case. Regardless of the classified risk level, the persistence of the family, the community, and the police force made it possible for a deeply buried truth to be revealed. When the final signature was placed on the cover page of the concluding report, the Ellie Hart case was officially closed, not cleared, but closed, to record that justice had been served, albeit delayed. The case, once shrouded in the darkness of a 2002 Sheffield full of blind spots, finally concluded with a brief note in the file, "Case closed, truth established after 14 years." Looking back at the story of Ellie Hart and the 14-year journey to bring the truth to light, people in the UK today can draw many practical lessons about personal safety and community responsibility. Sheffield in 2002 was a setting of camera blind spots, limited risk assessment procedures, and heavy reliance on statements rather than objective data. Today, although surveillance and forensic technology are far more advanced, the lessons from that story remain fully relevant. Ellie walking alone through a dark area around Western Bank after an argument, combined with her phone suddenly being turned off, highlights situations common in modern life: momentary emotions, poorly lit routes home, and the complacency of thinking a short walk is safe. In the UK today, even with wider CCTV coverage, countless dark spots still exist in cities, especially on university campuses, parks, and old industrial areas. The practical advice is clear. Always inform a trusted person of your location when traveling alone at night, avoid routes that lack lighting, even if they seem shorter, and keep your phone active at all times. The story also underscores the importance of reporting unusual behavior early. Darren Cole had previously been cautioned for conduct that made female students feel unsafe. A small detail in 2002, but a key that reopened the file in 2016. In the UK today, universities and workplaces all encourage people to report any behavior that makes them feel unsafe. And Ellie's story is clear proof that seemingly minor warnings can save lives. Finally, the greatest lesson is perhaps persistence. Justice may come late, but the truth will not disappear if the community does not give up. If you're interested in meticulously reconstructed investigation stories like the Ellie Hart case, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any journeys in search of the truth. Thank you for watching until the end, and see you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the hidden corners that time seemed to have covered.